you're really unpacking some sore topics for Earth females, at least. But yeah, those are my thoughts. And again, very subjective from my perspective of a female on Earth. I'd say-
Which I need, because I'm definitely not that. I'm barely on Earth as it is.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Let's Fix Stories. This is the podcast where we take works in progress or individuals' finished works, and we help them to mine it and get the best quality they can out of it, while also just exploring their love for the story they are trying to tell. Today, we have a very special guest and friend of ours. We have Brent here with us. Brent, why don't you introduce yourself more formally, I guess, so that
Do I need a tie to do this? So my name's Brent Lindstrom. I own and run Like-Minded Arts, which is where I self-publish my novels, and also am an independent film studio there. And I'm also working towards building an actual studio there that will be for me and other creatives to work in. But yeah, I've been writing for several years, and I've been publishing books by myself, and just had a great time doing stories. And now, as I'm moving into the screenwriting world so that I can actually turn these into a visual format, you guys, I think, are going to be looking at one of my first full-length screenplays today.
Yes.
It is
Very
very
nice.
exciting because it's also the first screenplay that we're actually getting to look at on this podcast. And that is exciting, especially for Jared, whose first love is filmmaking. Unfortunately, Charles can't be here, but he also is a filmmaker. And so it's exciting to get to dive into our first screenplay on podcast.
I agree. I agree with that. I've very much been excited about this particular episode since we found out we were going to be doing it, because I have been waiting for a screenplay to come across the desk so we could talk about it. I love all of our authors that have been on the show. Please don't think I don't.
But
I
I'm special.
I love Brent Moore. I'm sorry.
Oh.
So today we are going to be talking about his project. I believe it's called A Good Man, and it reads like Pleasantville in space a little bit, which I think is kind of cool. But yeah, we're going to talk about that. So before we do that, usually the first thing we do is we have the writer talk about who the target audience would be for, why this project was so special to them, give an elevator pitch to what it's about, that kind of stuff. So
Okay.
the floor will be yours, Brent.
All right. So one of my big tenets that I hang all of my work on is that I'm trying to write stories for an adult audience that are clean reads, meaning that I try to leave all the sexual content and profanity out of the picture. But at the same time, I'm not trying to preach any specific doctrines of things to anybody. This is just for people who want more of that PG to PG vibe instead of going full R on anything. And so this particular story, A Good Man, it's a rom-com in space, but it does have that Pleasantville vibe, like you said. You're coming into this place that feels very 1950s, and it's secluded from the rest of the galaxy kind of thing. And most humanity on Earth doesn't know this place exists. And yet it does, but it's mostly populated by women. It goes on to explain more of why that is in the, later on in the story. But yeah, it's I don't know really why this one attracted me so much, except that the whole idea of it was just hilarious to me. And I wanted it to read like it was a rom-com. I mean, I'm not into big rom-coms. Like, none of my stories have actually been romantic comedies.
Mhm.
But when I came across this idea, I was like, you know what? This is it. I'm learning the rom-com genre. I'm gonna do one of these. I haven't seen a whole lot of these in media out lately. I know they're not the most popular right now, but hey, everything's circular. Everything comes around, and I just like doing things that I get excited. I got such a big long list of story ideas. It's like, eeny, meeny, miny, mo. No, I'm excited about this one. That's the one we're doing. And it may not have a real reason other than it makes me laugh.
Makes
That
sense.
is a good reason.
Jaylon will tell you she is very familiar with this, as I am very much. That we call it the creative or story ADHD that I have, because I will lock in on something and stay up all hours of the night to create it, to make it, and then present it to Jaylon and waste hours of her time and then be like, but this is cool too. And I'm going to go mess with that and then go do that. So, you know, she's a really good sport about it and way nicer to me than she should be, but I appreciate it. So, so I totally understand that. And I respect that way of looking at things. I also really like the idea that you talk about writing for adults while remaining clean. Again, I think Jaylon appreciates that kind of content.
That's the kind of content that I love because I do come from a large family with all age ranges. So whenever we want to do a family movie night, it's harder to find those movies that are entertaining for adults while also appropriate for younger people to watch.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I feel that that happens a lot too with even more so with like indie films. Like I'm an indie guy here. I love watching indie movies, but a lot of them do veer into that rated R category, and it's hard to even go to film festivals because I look at the list and I look at what they're about, and it's like, oh come on, I just wanna wanna go have a good time at a film festival, and none of this content looks like anything that I would really feel comfortable watching.
I respect that. I respect that. I'm the black sheep of the group because I am incredibly into all the horrible things. But it's more it's mostly just because I really do think I really like the realism of it. So I understand. I understand the clean adult way of looking at things and also because I have no kids and no siblings. Well, I have siblings, I have tons. None of all of which are older than me. I'm the third youngest in my large 24 siblings. I'm the third youngest, but I understand the idea of like you want to have something that everybody can relate to while still being a compelling story that still tells something that people want to hear. On the flip side, for me, it's always been I like to show the world as raw and as real as it is. And so I always enjoy stories like that and I tell stories like that, but I totally get why someone's like, I want to do something that I can share with everyone and that I feel comfortable sharing with the world. So I respect that. And I think that that's solid.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, the art is art, and there's a lot of categories of art. There's a lot of audiences for art, and
Sure.
the more we, if we want to specialize in one, that doesn't mean that we completely say the other one's not ever worth watching. It's just
Sure.
for a certain audience, and that's all it is. So
Definitely.
I'm cool with that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So we break this down usually by doing a what's working,
Build me
what's
up, and then you break me down.
pretty much yeah. We're just gonna we're gonna invite you in and give you a coat and then we're gonna beat you up. But
Zip me
yeah,
up
so
and ship me out.
yeah. We start with the what's working, and then we go to what needs work, and then we discuss the thematic feel of what our thoughts on the thematic elements were, like what's the theme really saying. Today, I am, as I've said before the podcast, I am nursing a bit of a headache, so more of my role will be moderating as much as I can. I will add things, and then I have more craft questions and thoughts that I will share. But that's pretty much how we will go as we go. So if you're ready, we can dive into things.
Yeah. I will also add in our disclaimer of
I was gonna say
this is a live editing session, but it's not just supposed to be us editors talking. It's supposed to be more of a partnership brainstorm session between us as editors and then you as the writer. So we'll say our take on things, but if you have different things to add from your perspective or more information to give us, we have the theme section in this discussion because we want to make sure that with our suggestions, we're helping you realize the vision that you had and telling the story that you wanted to tell. So feel free to jump in at any time, interrupt us, give us your thoughts. And definitely it's supposed to be a conversation, not just us talking at you. There's
Don't do my darlings.
the other disclaimer that we will add too is one, we appreciate you being brave enough to share your work. I personally understand, as well as Jalen also understands, sharing your work with anybody is taking a bit of your soul and giving it to someone and asking them to basically rip it to shreds is not an easy thing, and it's not for the faint of heart. So you showing up and doing that is incredible, and we appreciate it, as well as the fact that this all is rather subjective. So what we think is subjective, the only opinion that really matters in the end is the artist who created it. And I especially feel that way about film, more so almost than books, honestly. It isn't less true, it's just me being biased as a filmmaker. Yeah. So all that aside, with all that said, let's jump in. Jaylon, you usually lead us off with the what's working, so we will let you do that today.
all right. So to start out with, within your first scene, within the opening scene, I saw a strong start because you mentioned your theme in that opening scene. And I think that that creates the strongest possible through line throughout your entire story. And it sets up the purpose for why people should pay attention to your story right up front. So immediately you have the audience hooked with, this is why I'm telling you this story and this is why you need to pay attention. So already like off to a strong start there. I'll just read through my notes here. The next part that really jumped out at me was I loved the image that you wrote of Button's Hawaiian shirt and khaki shorts, stepping off of the spaceship in this alien world dressed like that. I just absolutely loved that mental image. It reminded me of the delightful version of aliens from Lilo and Stitch, which is something that we just spoke about on our other podcast, Let's Talk Stories. And I think the world needs more of that. So I loved that image.
We forgot that I even wrote that.
I also really loved you set up a very realistic, futuristic world in the sense that even all the advanced tech that they have doesn't always work, which is another thing that we don't see enough of in these kinds of sci-fi stories. In that scene where the AI assistant kept mishearing the captain's directions when he was trying to get it to do a thing for him, and it wasn't being helpful at all, it was acting like Siri, was a marvelous scene. I absolutely loved that. It gave us, when you incorporate scenes like that in like even this sci-fi futuristic world, you give your audience something to relate to because it's the kind of realistic everyday problems that they understand in their world. So it helps them to put themselves into that story even more so. So I really loved that. You also had a lot of creative lines sprinkled throughout, such as cosmic couch potatoes definitely spoke to me. And having one of the characters sniff at Jim like he was a 6 foot tall apple pie was also an amazingly creative line. I felt like the chemistry between Cassie and Jim felt really believable and palpable. I could get behind that chemistry. It definitely leaped off the page, and I loved the way you wrote that. Last thing I will say, and this is an overall thing, I felt like your subversion of expectations and plot twists was spot on. Cassie falling for Jim, not the captain. That was a really great plot twist. You subverted the expectations of people who have seen a lot of stories like this before, and you gave them a reason to say, "Oh, I didn't think that would happen. What happens next?" I especially liked the plot twist of us finding out that Dill is actually scared and doesn't want to be married, despite how he comes across as like this shameless and prideful flirt. And that was one that I really latched onto of like, oh, I really love learning more about this character, that it's not all what they put up as a front. And I think that giving them that depth and that second dimension is really, really great. The twist that you had for almost all of the characters ending up to be different than what we assume at first meeting is a great illustration of the theme that I think you should definitely continue to lean into. So
Okay.
that is the end of my notes. Jared, I will also say I read the full first 10K words up to page 40, 45, 50. Jared only read the first 10 pages. And Jared, you can explain why the first 10 pages are so crucial for screenplays in particular.
Yeah, no problem. So generally speaking, and this is a collective opinion based on, not a collective opinion, this is an opinion of a select school of thought when it comes to screenwriting. But when it comes to screenwriting, in my learning, I was always taught that the first 10 pages will tell you everything you need to know about a screenwriter, how much they mastered the craft, how experienced or inexperienced they are, everything that I need to know about the story. And because the timeline of a screenplay is so short, everything has to be done in a very specific, concise way. Usually, you should have an idea of who the main character is. You should have an idea of what they want. You should have an idea of possibly who the antagonist is, or at least what the antagonistic force might be. You should have all of those in the first 10, 15 pages. 10 is better than 15, but that's right. So usually when I'm reading a screenplay of somebody else's, I usually will give them the first 10 pages to see. I liked what I read in the first 10 pages, so normally I would have read more, but again, with the headache and everything that's been going on, and I've been battling this headache for the last week and a half now, off and on, so it's just been I was just like, no, 10 pages gives me what I need.
Also, now you can give an opinion from the perspective of these studio executives if you're trying to pitch your
For
film
sure.
to them,
Right.
someone who would only read the first 10, 15 pages.
Yes. And given that you are more of an indie guy who probably does the indie thing, you're probably not necessarily trying to give your script to a big studio or anything like that. But nonetheless, this coverage you pay them and they will read the whole thing. That's their job. The like a reader or usually a executive assistant who works for a producer or executive, they're usually going to read 10 pages, if that. Sometimes they'll read even less. But in this particular case, that's where I was coming from with it.
I get that too. I mean, because even as an indie, for me, if I get so in love with my story and I become blind to it, then how am I going to know? I mean, it's always great to have somebody else's eyes on it other than just your own. I was the same way with my books. You read them and you think you're in love with them.
Mhm.
Then you
Oh,
come
yeah.
back a year later, like, oh, I pushed that on people. Ew. But in this case, a movie I mean, I can make a book for a few $1,000s. A movie, that costs a lot of money. That's a big investment, you know? I mean,
For sure.
this thing gotta be tight.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So what I will say is that I agree with Jaylon in the perspective that your opening is really, really good. One, you did mention before the podcast that this is like your first screenplay that you like full feature screenplay. I couldn't tell that from reading it. Like I couldn't tell. I can tell that you are a writer because I've read many different screenplays and some by people who are just not writers, and that doesn't mean that they can't become great screenwriters, because I think that anybody can be a great writer eventually with enough work and effort. It's not as mystical as and I say that for the people that are listening and watching who are like, I can never write. But no, it's not as mystical as writers will want you to believe or have you believe, because we like to think that we're Gandalf the Grey and everybody else is just unworthy.
I
But
am Gandalf. I'm a Gandalf bald. But if it did grow, it would be growing gray or white. I'd be Gandalf the white.
writers we're not that fancy. We're not that special. We're just people who put in a lot of work at getting good at what we do. But I think that a lot of screenwriters, a lot of screenwriters, when they're coming in, they will do it and they try to tell the whole story in the first page. So it's just blocks and blocks and blocks of text that, it's just like, this isn't a book. And so you got to slow down and figure out what needs to go. With you, it was like I visualized it. Another skill that you seem to have that I've noticed that not a lot of screenwriters that I've met, which I recently found that I have this skill, but I didn't realize it, was writing cinematically. Because a lot of people, they'll write and it becomes very technical, which I had that trouble with prose. Jaylon will tell you of the technical. This guy does this, then he does that, and it comes back to screenwriting, because screenwriting is nothing more than a blueprint that you use to make a movie. So it's very technical. But when you sit down with a writer who knows what they're doing, sometimes it's like when I'm reading on the page, I'm watching the movie in my mind. And when I read this, like the first paragraph, the 1950 style music plays in the background. We're passing through an asteroid belt, a large mining ship, just this mentality. And I'm thinking, okay, maybe I'm watching Alien or I'm watching something like that. And this is maybe not same genre, but just that kind of feel of like I'm outer space, and this is really cool with 50s music playing. Okay, now this is like a Fallout game or something. This is kind of cool. I like this. So I really liked your ability to show us, not tell us, the story, and really pull me in and make me feel like I'm in what I consider. I tell everybody this as well. Church. Cinema is church for me. So when I'm reading a script and it puts me in that place, it's like, oh, you sat me right in the pews. And I'm really, really grateful for that experience. So thank you for that. The other thing I liked is your character descriptions. You don't harp on it too long. Like, for instance, when we met Dill, we're not harping on it for too long. It's not, it's very, very snappy of, this is who he is. He's handsome, but stick thin in his late teens and early 20s. And it's like, okay, cool. Now I know who this person on. I can move on. I think a lot of times writers will get very, 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 bog us down with description of, he's wearing a red shirt and he's fat and he's blah, 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 and it's like, okay, cool. Let's move on. The greatest advice I ever heard about writing screenplays is when you're writing, write it as if you were describing the movie to a blind person, like moment for moment. You can't stop and get caught up on, oh, well, the door has cracks and the paint is chipping, and you can't get caught up in that because by that point in the movie, we would have already moved on. So write it as if you're writing it for a blind person, and you'll almost always get it right as far as that goes. I also really liked Cassie. I didn't want to, but I did like her. The feel that I got when I was reading this was, especially the conversation between Cassie and her mom, is it felt like, and this is why I didn't want to like her, because it felt like a romance novel that you would read from a female POV. It's just this even though the conversation wasn't romantic, it felt very romantic. It had the hanging of the romance on it. I could just tell. I could just taste that it was coming. And I was like, don't do this to me, Brent. Don't do this to me.
It is a rom-com.
But see, that's the thing. Another thing you'll find about me, I tell every guest this, I never read the description of what the story's about. I don't want to know anything when I go into it. I just want to read it as if I picked it up and was just like in reading through it. That way it feels like a real experience for me of like I'm getting to feel it. And also just I want you to know how somebody who didn't read the back of the book or didn't watch the trailer for your movie or whatever, how somebody who was just like flipping through the channels and they saw it and they were like, oh, let me check out and see what this is. I want you to get that perspective and as opposed to Jaylon or Charles when he's here's perspective of more of the like, oh, we did all the research and now we're gonna read it to give you that dual perspective from it.
Perks of having a panel of editors instead of just one.
Yes. So while I did like Cassie, I like that she feels spunky to me. Like she's not a typical. My biggest beef with romance books and movies is always that the main character, especially the woman character, always feels like such a caricature of a woman, and they're always the same. They need a man, and life is horrible because they don't have one, and life sucks. And Cassie seems like more like my mom wants me to have a guy. If it happens, cool. But and that I really like that. I think it's a different take on the female main character, especially when it's written by a man, because I do feel that men don't always get it right when it comes to writing women. And why would they? We're not women. But you seem to have done that very well. And I was very impressed with that. I also love your action descriptions. For instance, her mom shoots a Death Star glare. Maybe it's just because I've been like really into Star Wars lately that this just hit right. But I love that. There was another line too that I really liked, which also just made me say, oh, this guy he's an author. I can tell because this is something only an author would say. Some areas as thick as pea soup, others wispy nothings. Then a planet comes into view, mostly water, some land. The whole thick as pea soup and wispy nothings is such an author line, and I love that because it's like, again, this guy knows how to write. And you entertained me for those 10 pages. And that, again, that's not easy to do in 10 pages. It's a really tall order. Even I struggle with it a lot. And most of the time it's like I'll bleed into like 12 or 13 pages, but I really try to stick to that. So it's hard to keep somebody's attention, grab them and say, hey, look, pay attention to me. This story's good and you should keep reading. And you were able to do that in the first 10 pages for me. So that was fantastic.
I mean, when you're doing something like a screenplay too, like I also need to approach it from the point of an actor. I've taken acting lessons, and if you can visualize what your character is actually like, it helps inform your actual acting. And so, yeah, I think not just describing something, but you're giving that blueprint, helping them convey what they need to actually work off of.
For sure, 1,000%. I agree. That would be everything that I had for what's working.
Done.
We can just like close the podcast now, right? Now let's lay it on like peanut butter. Let's go thick.
Now is where we pull out the batons and we begin the surgical dismantling of your story. I'm just kidding. Okay, Jaylon, you can lay out your thoughts.
All right, I have two big thoughts.
Only two?
And then I have a couple smaller thoughts.
Oh, good.
Taking in mind, like, this is a first draft, and first drafts are supposed to be messy. They're supposed to be half-baked. Like, your job in a first draft is just to get the story onto the page and make sure that you're not getting in your own way, kind of like locking yourself up with a pressure of perfection or feeling like you have to make the first draft perfect. Like it's not supposed to be perfect. Anyway, um, the first biggest thing, I feel like we need higher stakes conflict. And this is from my experience of being a woman who has read a lot of books about these female main characters who either really don't want to get a guy and are stereotypically like, I'm an independent woman and I need nobody. And then the other stereotype of I need a guy because that is my entire personality. So I feel like the conflict of a girl needing to get and keep a guy is boring because I've seen it so many times before, unless there's something else going on underneath. So give us a clue into why Cassie needs a guy so badly. Why would it be detrimental if any of the other girls from the planet suddenly flirted with, I'm going to call him Captain Crunchy just because that nickname stuck in my head from the script itself. I'll let you tell me how to actually pronounce his name, but just so you know, I am going to call him Captain Crunchy.
No, that's cool. I mean, I wanted it to be just kind of a fun play on that, but yeah, I had envisioned his name being Crunchy, but
Okay.
everyone calls him Crunchy, Captain Crunch or Captain Crunchy. But yeah, so for this, and I alluded to it, I tried to hint to it in a few areas, but I probably didn't bring it out well enough. Is that with her species, even though outwardly they look human enough and they're compatible enough with humans, inwardly, if they don't mate at a certain age, their bodies actually shut down. They're living on a world where food is scarce, protein especially is scarce. And so there's a scarcity that drives their genetics. And if they aren't quote unquote needed, then natural selection kicks them out. And yeah, just basically through death. So, but if they are able to continue repopulating the species, then their genetics kick in and it allows them to live a longer life.
Okay. Gotcha. So I did kind of pick up on that in the couple places that you mentioned. I noticed a mom's line in the opening scene said she'd be heartbroken if Cassie died young because she couldn't find a mate, or like, you can't fight biology. So those lines did stick out to me, and I did have a question like, is there something more going on here? So I think I would say just lean into that more and center that more, bring it up a little bit more, as like there is something more at stake here than just, a girl wanting or a mother wanting a daughter to get a guy. Which brings me to my second big thing. From the opening few scenes, I couldn't understand necessarily. I didn't know how to take Cassie and her mom, because I felt like they were framed as they had good intentions. They were the protagonists we were supposed to root for. But in the opening scene, it was kind of like you had that question of like, is Cassie's mom actually an antagonist? But then suddenly, like, it flipped on a dime, and now Cassie and her mom are like in cahoots, kind of scheming together. I mostly thought of Cassie's mom as an antagonist because, as a female myself who's had to face this exact kind of pressure from adults in my life of, you're young, you have to get married and give me grandkids now. She even says, like, point blank, that she doesn't really care about her daughter's plans, and giving her granddaughter who's more important. So again, like, in my head, I immediately was like, oh, that's an antagonistic character now. But then again, there was that sudden switch of now Cassie and her mom are scheming. And it felt like almost an inconsistency that confused me, because Cassie's mom is so big on Cassie finding a good man, but they don't seem really big on keeping their own characters good. They have no trouble trying to trick or trap or, kind of flirt with any guy they can, using whatever means necessary to trap them into a relationship. And it doesn't seem like the kind of good character that a good man would be attracted to, if that makes sense. Like, in the real world, in my mind, I see most people who are focusing on their character and being good people are the ones who find another good person that is a good partner for them. They don't find that when they're purposely going out and seeking that out just from, the first person they're willing to settle for. Does that make sense?
I think so. And that's one of those things I need to explore a little more. So I know that when I was first trying to write their relationship together, it was kind of challenging because my initial genre here is rom-com sci-fi, but I always liked the buddy pictures too, where you've got the protagonist and their buddy, and they're always fighting each other and they hate each other. In the end, they would never leave each other. You think of, I don't know what a good example is, like the one where they crash the weddings, Wedding Crashers.
Wedding Crashers.
Wedding Crashers. So, you've got the two guys who are always butting up against each other's, but in the end, they're still good buddies, kind of a thing. So, I wasn't quite sure if I should lean into the buddy relationship of her and her mom, because that is a conflicting relationship, but at the same time, they have similar goals in the end. So, just kind of something that I was playing with, but not sure if it actually worked out. Sounds like it was more confusing than not.
I think I really love it. I love the concept of that because I have seen like those kinds of relationships between mothers and daughters. And I love to see because it is like, you've gone from a parent child relationship to now your friends. And I think that that underscores the truth that family is there through thick and thin. Like they're the people that we will fight the most with, but at the end we'll never abandon. So I think that that could work, especially I think this topic in particular, you have to balance the tone really well because you're taking a really tricky situation since this is it's such a volatile relationship that brings up a lot of feelings in your audience, a mother and daughter, especially a mother who kind of has this kind of pressure of, find a guy, find a guy, find a guy. Um, and she also has that for herself as well. I would assume that she has already met the qualifications for like being able to continue in natural selection, not taking her out, even though her husband passed away. But she also is like trying to find a guy. And I think it was more just the confusion of I wanted more of that conversation to play out of how do we hold this contradiction, this duality of you have to find a good man, but you also have to be willing to wait it out for the long haul and not just settle for the first man that you find, even though like time is of the essence.
Right.
So I think just having that conversation, even though it is a rom-com and we're trying to give these really outlandish situations, and it literally is like a lot of people are going to watch this story through their perspective of understanding their relationships on Earth in the context of Earth's natural laws and physics. But you're setting this in a totally different world. So you do have room to play there and use your imagination and figure out like, is this a relationship that can hold this duality and it's just naturally understood by these characters? And so there's not that kind of irreparable hurt that Cassie feels from her mother giving her this kind of pressure. So yeah, I think that it can work. You just have to dig into the tone and have some more of these conversations. They don't have to be huge. They don't have to overshadow the rom-com of the story, but just having more of that discussion. And this kind of plays into what we'll talk about with themes. So I won't go too much into it here. But yeah, those are my thoughts. And again, very subjective from my perspective of a female on Earth.
Which I need because I'm definitely not that. I'm barely on Earth as it is.
I love it. Okay, so then the two other smaller things. I really loved the banter and the dialogue, but there were certain moments where I felt like some of the characters could have more of a distinct voice. There's a really cool realm in your story where there's all these characters come from entirely different worlds. So really play into that of like they have entirely different cultural backgrounds that are separated by entire planets. This goes for food, mannerisms, language, adages, physicality. Like, Cassie at one point playfully punches someone in the arm. Like, is that something that is a thing on their planet? Is that a mannerism from Earth that even though she wasn't born on Earth, she brought with her? Those kinds of things, like just giving more depth and more distinct tones to these characters because they banter really well, but they all sometimes sound the same if you take out the character headings of who's saying the lines. But again, like this is a first draft thing, and giving characters distinct tones like that really comes into play as you continue working with the draft and like really get to know these characters even more by just completely falling into their world and working through multiple new drafts. So you're right where you need to be for your first draft. I'm going to start out with a question. Later on, because we only read the first 10K words, but later on, does Cassie's hobby or gift of playing with old tech come into play again.
If I've got this right, she's tried to sabotage the ship already. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. And then later on, she gets accused of it, but it hasn't really happened.
Yes.
Her use of tech doesn't really show up quite so much later. I mean, it shows that they're not completely stupid near the end, and they have some ingenuity. They do end up building a type of a space station there for the people later, and they kind of put their own flair on it. But I would say she doesn't lean as heavily into her love of tech as maybe the intro might suggest she could.
Okay. Because I was kind of from reading the intro, I was kind of waiting to see, like, at the climactic moment, it was gonna be Cassie's gift of understanding old tech that saved the day. And I'm not saying that's what has to happen, but when you give a character a hobby like that, it should, because it's so much a part of their characters, it's a subplot, not a set piece.
Yeah.
So
We're not throwing out a red herring in the beginning where this is a plot structure piece that, yeah, I get it.
yeah. So just I wanted to see that play out a little bit more just for me because again, it's a hobby that she has that's a part of her character and I wanted to see that continue through. Um because the other thing, I wrote down a bunch of questions, and some of these may not be applicable, but these were some of the inconsistencies that I would be thinking about if I was working on editing this next draft. I would say, first question, what makes Cassie believe that the captain is good from that single radio conversation? What does he say or sound like that people on Earth or people on her planet don't sound like? What gives her the impression like, oh, this is a good man? Would Cassie know about Captain Crunch as a cereal in order to make that joke if she didn't grow up on Earth? Like, does her mom like restock their cabinets with cereal from Earth? Like those kinds of things. Where does the idea that they're landing to save the damsels in distress come from? If that's something that was kind of like made clear to Captain Crunch that, they weren't in distress. So like all these are different questions that kind of come up and some of them may be answered. It's okay to leave some of these questions unanswered in the first part, but just make sure that it doesn't carry on to be an inconsistency in your plot.
No, that's some good feedback. I like that.
Well, that's the end of mine. I won't ramble on too long. I will pass it back to Jared.
Okay, so changing the lens a little bit from the 50, what is it, 50 pages you read, Jaylon?
Yeah, I read like 45, 50 pages.
Yeah. So to a smaller bite-sized version of it, I'll share my thoughts as well. First question, I had a question first. I know this is a rom-com, and because it's a rom-com, is this tied together in your mind thematically? Like, is there a theme that you had in mind? And I know we're going to talk about theme more, but
This is one question that I probably ask if you had read the whole thing because the ending is kind of a surprise ending, which I know can be very risky in movies. So one of the themes, could be like tradition versus change or different things like that. But in the end, it's the definition of what is a good man. And, on Earth, we have kind of that saying in our minds, what does make a good man? And we all have different answers for how that is. And I was trying to hit that from the angle of somebody who maybe isn't from Earth culture. What does a good man mean to them? And, in the end, we find out what a good man really does mean to them. And so that's mostly the theme is definition, but playing into culture and how different peoples might perceive that differently.
Gotcha. Okay. And I'm glad that you said that. What is a good man? Because that was what even though I didn't read the whole thing, that was what I pulled away from it from the beginning was kind of like, okay, this is a conversation about what a good man is. And so I'm glad we were on the same wavelength there.
Okay.
The reason why I'm asking is like, I don't know if either of you have ever seen the movie Love Actually.
I've heard of it. I have not seen it.
I'm going to make a point with it regardless. So Love Actually is a rom-com type of movie, but it follows multiple different characters in their own specific relationships or pursuit of relationships or whatever. The general theme that's in the story though, and by theme in this case is less about like what are you trying to say and more about is this theme based. And so in this it's about similar to the movie Crash where like the theme is about like racism and how that all plays out into different people. With Love Actually, it's about love. It's about different kinds of love, different types of relationships, different stuff that's, stuff that's morally right, stuff that's morally wrong. You have a character that's like 10-year-old who has a crush on another 10-year-old, and he's trying to get her to like him the entire time. And then you have one where it's like a couple they're together, but the wife is in love with somebody who she's not married to, and there's all that. But the theme is ultimately about relationships. When I watch rom-coms, especially where there's a lot going on, I always wonder, is this a theme? So in the first 10 pages, it was very much about find a man, or let's get girls, or let's get women. Let's do it. That's what it felt like from both sides. I didn't get the feel that that was the theme of the overall story. Yes, it's Cassie and whoever she's going to end up with. But I didn't feel like the point of this was like multiple characters having relationships, or everybody wants to be with somebody. But even if that was the case, the point that I would make is that I think it's important to give all of those characters something else beyond just that, which aligns more with what Jaylon was saying, of giving all the characters something else, including Cassie, beyond just I need a man, I need a woman, or I want to be a piece of crap guy that wants to, go and rescue the dames, so to speak. And there needs to be something more, because people in real life aren't driven by, I mean, there are some people that are driven like that, but most people, are not driven by, I just want to be with somebody, and that is it. I have nothing else going on in my life. There is nothing, and I think that the best rom-coms are where there is a plot through line. And again, there could be, because I did not read all of it, so Jaylon, correct me if I'm wrong, but when there is a plot through line where there's stuff going on, and then these two characters, or three, based on just where I kind of see it going, it feels like there might be a love triangle thing coming. And so even in that, even if their goal is to ultimately have them become something one way or another, having them pursuing something else, having them wanting something else, and that relationship just kind of has to be either the reward of that thing, or it's the thing that enhances it. And I know that with a rom-com, it's a little bit different than like any other film that's not, where the romance is more of the subplot, where a rom-com is the focal point. It does get kind of hard to not get lost in the sauce of like people want to be together, that kind of thing. But there's more to them that, and I think layering them that way would be really, really helpful, of just kind of give them a little bit more to pursue. Again, Jaylon said it way better than I did as far as how that goes, but that's what I was thinking. Go ahead.
I will add in for reading 30 pages ahead of you. I think that the balance was really good for Captain Crunchy. Cassie, I think, is the one that Cassie and her mom are the ones that I would really want to see a little bit more of, like, what makes Cassie not want to be married? What does she have in her life that she wouldn't be able to have if she was married? What makes her willing to hold out on getting her mate in order to preserve her life? So yeah, raising the stakes and giving her a secondary want there, giving her more to her character than just, I need to find a guy and I need to manipulate the first guy that I see, that I decide that I like, into being with.
I agree. The other thing that was interesting to me was there was a bit of, not completely, but slightly, tonal whiplash for me. What I mean by this is that Dill, to me, felt almost sitcom-y with the level of his humor. At first, I liked it because I was like, okay, well, this guy's, he's cool. He's a ladies' man in a way. It's how it kind of came. Like, he's confident and enough to be able to talk to, because the thing that he said to Cassie, I would never be able to say to a woman. So I was like, yeah, this is my kind of guy. But once we left Dill and started having these other conversations, everybody else was humorous, but to me, they didn't feel as humorous as Dill did. Dill kind of felt out of place to me. And like a better example of this would be like, it's like, to me, it felt like I was watching an episode of Seinfeld when Dill was there, and then suddenly it became an episode of the Gilmore Girls. And it was like, there was I hope you're both familiar with those references. So it doesn't sound crazy, but the Gilmore Girls is definitely a humorous show, but it still has a level of like there's a seriousness to it that you can kind of understand and be like, okay, this is if they're funny, but I also get that these are real people and I enjoy it. While Seinfeld is far more out there, it's more it's funny. It's not meant to be like, oh, let's take this seriously. I felt that was kind of jarring for me. It just felt like Dill didn't belong in this world. So maybe it would be just a matter of some of the dialogue being a little bit different, a little more down to earth, compared to some of the other characters that are that speak. That would be my thought as far as that goes. That was where I was. I was going to make a comment about Cassie, but ultimately Jaylon made the thoughts that I had about Cassie already, so I don't need to lay that on. The thoughts I did have about her mother was I also had the same thought that she was going to be a foil type character or an antagonistic character for Cassie. I don't know what she goes on to become because I didn't see her again after those first 10 pages, so I don't know. But in that moment, I was like, oh, this is an interesting role. My question, I guess, was, were you trying to make, well, I guess like absurd or like an over exaggerated version of like the overbearing mother who's always trying to get her kid to have babies? Was that like the intention?
I would say originally no. The idea for me was to just create a little bit of bantering conflict between the two, and it probably just didn't come out the way that I had hoped it would.
Gotcha. Okay. Totally fine. Totally fine. I think that my thought process of that, my first thought was maybe he's making a commentary on what these type of women, how they behave and how absurd that actually is for women to constantly be. And I mean, obviously this isn't, 2025 in your story, but like in this day and age, like for someone to look at that way. But since that wasn't the intention, to me, it comes off now more as a bit excessive for the banter. Cause I think that you could totally have banter between Cassie and her mom without it having to be that extreme. I think that Cassie's mom can very much be an individual who is interested in more than just her daughter's ring finger and womb. And instead be more concerned about, other things that she might be and think, whether it be career, but understanding also that it is a planet of all women, and that there may be, there may be some real concern about not having someone. So then let that shine through. And I also think, I know it happens sometimes. My go-to screenwriting is almost never comedy of any kind. Ironically enough, me and my mentor are supposed to be working on a rom-com of our own. So I understand that. But so for me, I'm always thinking, well, what's the most dramatic way that we can do this? That's not the goal of your story. So I don't want to impose that on that. But I do think even still, you can still be humorous and still have some serious things that are stated. So, I mean, if there are real world consequences to not being married by a certain age, if there are real world consequences to not having a child by a certain age, express that. You can express that in a humorous way. There's tons of ways that you can deliver serious bad news or whatever in a humorous way, whether it be she lays it out as serious as it is, and then Cassie's the one who's like, you're always over exaggerating. You're always this, that, and the other, or, oh, sure, mom, and then you still have that same level of banter, but we still get to see this very real person with very real concerns that doesn't feel like a caricature of a mother, a baby boomer mom who, or even a Gen X mom who's just like, the sky will fall down if you don't deliver me children and get married. Hurry up or we're going to feed you to the dragon. It's like, you can really do that. So that's what I would aim for that.
Yeah, I was writing that down as you were speaking. It just reminded me that humor is often driven by realism. Like, you don't have to invent humor. Humor happens through the real life circumstances that we do.
For sure. The advice that was given to me when it comes to comedy, because I was very stressed out about writing comedy, and someone was like, just write the story, write it like a drama first, and then go back and you can add the jokes as to what would be a funny response to this, or what would be a funnier way to say this very serious thing. So, take your first draft and write it as if it's a sci-fi drama, and then be like, okay, now I'm going to go back in and add the gags that make it a little bit more humorous. So that's what I was thinking about that. The last thing that I had was, and this could be just because the way that I was reading it, but there is a part in, I think it was page 10, where I'm going to steal Jay Long's and call him Captain Crunchy, but like Captain Crunchy was talking to Big Jim and Button. And at one point, he makes a comment, I think, to Button about this is why I'm the captain and you're, what you are. And then later on, Button pretty much regurgitates that right back to Big Jim. So this is not necessarily something that's not working. This is more of a clarification, because if it's what I think it is, then it's fantastic and it tells me a lot about the character. If it's not, then it's a problem. So is Button regurgitating that back to him because as a character, he's just a person who will be talked down to, but then speak to someone else and talk down to them to sort of feel like, I'm as good as as the captain, I'm better than you. Maybe not in a malicious way, but I'm better than you. Kind of like siblings, where like, your the older brother is told by the mom or dad, you did this and this and this, and that's why you did this. And then you get around your younger sibling, and then you say the exact same thing back to them so that you can feel a little bit older and a little bit more important. Is that what was happening here? Or
Sort of, yeah. So kind of the idea between them is they're on a mining ship. It's just, it's just the 3 or 4 of them all together all the time. And aside from one of the characters, they're pretty much like siblings. They all get along with each other. They can say anything to each other. Maybe the captain wants a little more respect, but he's not going to get it from them. The idea is that, yeah, they can just kind of joke around with each other and, be jerks to each other, and it's just all good.
Yeah. Okay. Sweet. Yeah. Then you did exactly what I thought you were doing, and I like that. That tells me a lot about Button as a character, and it endeared him to me immediately, because I was like, I've been an older brother and a younger brother, and I know what that's like, and I would do that. I would do that to my older brother, honestly. But that's so I get that. So yeah, that's all I had for what wasn't working for me. But yeah, before we jump into like theme, any thoughts so far about what we've talked about? Anything you want to add or clarify for us?
I would be curious to know what your take is, though, on. Sorry, I stuck my earphone in there. That was weird. It made this whole side of my head go kind of goofy there. So I am curious to know what your take is on surprise endings on things like this, because you get that sort of M. Night Shyamalan thing going where it's like, oh, that's what. No, an actually better example is The Sixth Sense. I
Mhm.
remember watching The Sixth Sense and thinking, wow, this is so suspenseful. I can't wait till the end. And then I got the end reveal, and it's like, okay, cool. And I never wanted to watch it again because it's like the whole time you're building up to the surprise ending. And once you know the surprise, it's like the rest of the story is garbage now.
Yeah, that's true. Jaylon, did you want to answer that question first?
That's a very interesting question, because I was immediately thinking, like, I haven't experienced a surprise ending where I wasn't into it. Because if a story can get me like that, it's usually like, okay, mad respect. Like,
Hmm.
I was entertained. I especially like the surprise ending when it comes to rom-coms, because I feel like we've all watched enough Hallmark Channel to know, like, it's just a trope that it's boring because you know what to expect. It's like, why are we watching the story when we know that eventually the girl's gonna get the guy? So I
Right.
think having a surprise ending, especially for rom-coms, is the way to go to make it feel like a new, fresh story that people will want to watch. And I personally like, I totally see what you're saying. I never thought of it that way, but I totally see what you're saying of like, well, the surprise ending was it. Like, I'm not gonna watch the entire movie again because 'cause I'm not gonna be misled again because I already know the ending. So that experience is kinda ruined. But I've had plenty of movies, especially when it's like the kind of movie that I discover on my own, and it's then one that I can tell my family, like, "This is a family-friendly movie, we can have a movie night, and I'm so excited to show this movie to you because I want you to go through what I went through when I
Mhm.
watched this movie," with the surprise twist ending and, having the rug pulled out from under what you expected. So personally, I like surprise endings. I've never experienced a movie where it was then ruined for me because of the surprise ending, as long as the tone still matches the theme that you're going for. I think we talked a lot about just tonal sensitivity and consistency here. Because again, like, you're really unpacking some sore topics for Earth females, at least. So I think these are really important things to unpack in stories like these, because humor breaks down our defenses, and we can kind of have a better chance of seeing life from a different perspective, or seeing life issues from a different perspective when we're taken out of our world, and then humor breaks down our defenses. But I would say just make sure that whatever surprise ending you have in mind, make sure that it aligns tonally with the message that you're trying to give and the theme that you're trying to weave into this story.
For me, I think surprise endings are very hit or miss with me. I love being surprised. I really do. I love being surprised in the movies. I don't like surprises in real life, but I do like surprises in the movies, and it's very rare that a movie or a TV show will do something that I didn't expect to happen and be like, "Oh, okay, cool." And I always enjoy when that happens. Especially because, when you're a writer, right? You have a tendency of pattern recognition. So, and then you recognize that most stories are in essence told the same way, give or take. There's a few beats that may be different, but overall, the general overall story flows the same. So you're usually like, okay, I know where this is gonna go. This person is that. Sometimes it gets spoiled because like that person that's casted is like always a villain or something like that. So it's like, oh, I knew he was gonna be the one who did that. But like, so I love a moment where a writer or a movie will lure me in and make me think that this is one kind of story, but then all of a sudden flip it and it be something completely different. And even that's challenging because then it becomes like you're not fulfilling the promise that you made as a writer. But I think it has to be emotionally satisfying. So I think that as long as the surprise ending is emotionally satisfying, that usually works for me. And I think that works. I do think it is a bit of a risk for stuff like if you're taking a screenplay and you're going to enter it in like a competition, or you're going to try to give it to an executive or something like that. That is a bit of a risk because it's like you're betting that they're going to sit down and read the entire thing. They're not going to, or they're going to skim it, and miss like some of the seeds that you planted earlier that pay off in this big surprise later. And so that's a bit of a risk, but I think that as an actual finished product, as a film, if somebody goes to a festival to see your thing, or somebody, you put it on Amazon or whatever you do with it, if a person truly sits down and watches it and sees it to the end, I think as long as you reward them with something that is emotionally satisfying or and honest to the story that you've been telling up until this point, I think that there's nothing wrong with doing it at all.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
No problem. So talk about theme a little bit. We talked about it a little bit already, but I want to talk about it a little bit more. So, John, what were your thoughts?
Well, first of all, it's in the title, it's in the opening scene, which is really, really good. Again, I got the sense from the entire script that the theme was what makes a good man and how do you find one. And I kind of saw some seeds being planted as far as I read for a good man isn't always who you think they will be from outer appearances, which I think is a super important conversation to have. It's a theme that I don't see enough in rom-coms or in any romantasy, really. I think that it's a conversation that has to be had for audiences today. It's one that I personally would want to have media that helps spark that conversation. If I had a daughter, I'd want to have a story that I can watch with her to say, now this conversation is sparked, let's talk more about it. And it be a positive experience because it was sparked by a story that made us laugh. So I really love that. I think that the theme is solid. And the main thing is just going to be making sure that that very important theme is carried out honestly, both to your world and to the way people will perceive your world because they live in our world, if that makes sense. So,
Right.
for example, with Cassie and her mom, like their goal is to find good men, but their goal is also to manipulate any man that they find into staying with them. Dealing a little bit more honestly with that balance of, how do you hold this very time is of the essence in their world with the real truth in our world of you can't just settle and expect that the first man that you settle for and manipulate into being with you is going to be a good man.
I agree with Jaylon on that, as well as the fact that you did something that a lot of writers don't do. It comes from John Irving, who once said that whenever possible, tell the whole story in the first sentence. And you did that with the title. And like I said, in the first page, I already know what the point is. And when they say that, for the writers that are listening, that sentence, it confounded me for a very long time because I didn't know what that meant. I was like, it's a hard thing to do. But what they ultimately mean is, what are you trying to say? And if you can tell that in the first sentence without smacking me in the face with it, of like, this is a story about how to find a man. It's and that would work if it was like a parody. But overall, I think being able to sort of make it very clear from the first page, what is this about? What are you really trying to say? And you made that very, very clear early on. And so I do agree that the thematic idea of a good man is solid. I think that a good man is basically, it's a myth to keep women obedient. And I think that curiosity is really the first act of, as a human, the first act of rebellion. Right. So I think you in this story are at least for me, what I gathered from what I read is that this is a conversation about not necessarily what is a good man per se, but one, why do we have to have borders around what a good man is? Why does it need to be anything other than, sometimes a person can just be a person, and sometimes what you think is good isn't always good. And sometimes what you think isn't, sometimes might be just the thing that you need. And I think that that's what I felt, and that's what I hoped would continue as it went on. But I always love when an author or screenwriter has something to say, because that it's the number. If there's anything that gets on my nerves about storytelling is, and I know that some movies, specifically in movies, can be blockbusters and have very summer popcorn movies that seem like they have no point and they don't matter. And some of them really don't have any point. They're just to get people to go into the theater and enjoy their popcorn, and that's totally fine. But I've always been a firm believer that a story is not good if it has nothing to say. I think that the more experienced you are as a writer, the more you have, or even older you are, and the more you experience the world, the more you do have to say. And you, my friend, have something to say here, and I enjoyed what you had to say. So yeah, those are my thoughts thematically.
There's definitely a reason why I put that as the very first thing that was working for me, because usually when we work with authors or screenwriters, it's usually coming up in conversation that, like, you need to make your theme more of the foundation of your story. You need to weave that through line right from the beginning all the way to the end. But you already had that nailed, and that is really the first step in making a strong story. So for a first draft in general, this is in amazing shape because you have that foundation set. And then the rest of, like, what you'll do to clean it up as you go through the rest of your drafts in the editing process, like, that's all to be expected, but you already have a perfect foundation for a really strong story. So amazing job. And thank you so much for sharing it with us.
I look forward to going through and putting a lot of these comments you put together in here, and love to have you guys do my actual edit on it. So that'd be fun.
Awesome.
We would have a blast too.
We would. We would. And rest assured, I will read the whole thing if we're doing that to make sure that it's. But I agree with Jaylon. One of the things we've incorporated into the 1 brilliant arc method, which came from the way that I structured stories. I don't know if Jaylon had it that way before we started working together, but
yeah.
But like for me, it's always been important that you start with the theme. This is less about for you, Brent, but you can feel free to take this advice if you'd like. The thing that I always recommend, especially for younger writers or people who are just starting, is walk around with a book, a little notebook or your phone or whatever. And whenever you come across a issue in the world, a thing that's happening in your everyday life, just whether it be political, whether it be romantic, whatever, anything that you come across, and you'll do it every day if you're out in the world living, even if you're not, you'll still run into moments where it's like, this bothers me, or I like this, or whatever. And I have a thematic thought, or not even a thematic, I have a thought or an opinion about this particular thing. I have a feeling about this, and I wanted to write down whatever that feeling is. And that feeling, that is a theme. And once you have that, that's a thematic statement. And then once you pull that out, now you just think about, well, what characters, what world, what things would ultimately express this idea? And then you just create characters that align on, I always like to create a scale of the two extremes. So One side of it is, for instance, if the idea is that, love always hurts, if that's the theme that it says, on one side, love always hurts. On the other side, love is the greatest thing of all time. And then I just create characters that line up on that scale. And you bake that into your story from the beginning. And this is how you end up with a screenplay like Brent's, where it's in really good shape. Even after the first draft, you don't have to go back and figure out, well, what was I trying to say when I wrote this? And then your story becomes something else. You have a much better chance of having stronger drafts if you know what you're trying to say from the beginning. And I know that's a different school of thought than some other people. Some people like to say, figure it out later, just write the draft. And I say pooey to that, figure out what you want to say and say it. But yeah,
That's a fun exercise. I haven't done that specifically. I've done that to a degree with characters, because in whatever you're doing, you always run into just interesting people, and it's just fun to take notes, even if it's mental notes about, oh yeah, there's people like that out there. That's fun. That's interesting, and without trying to make fun of them at the same time.
for
Yeah,
sure.
if you want story ideas, whether, as Brent was saying, characters, or whether Jared was saying thematic thoughts, just go to Walmart. Just go to Walmart for an hour. I promise you will find some story inspiration there.
I always like the bumper sticker that people slap on your cars. I saw you at Walmart.
So we want to end off by saying, Brent, thank you so much for sharing your story with us. Thank you for finally giving me a screenplay. I appreciate it so much. I can't thank you enough for that. But overall, thank you for sharing your story, sharing your heart, sharing your soul, sharing your thoughts with us. Like I said, it does not go unnoticed to me that every single time any writer that ever comes on here is doing this, that they are genuinely showing us a piece of themselves, their soul, that they don't show everybody else all the time. And that it's a really, not to sound weird, but it really is an intimate thing to do with the person that you don't really know. And I think that's kind of cool that you did that. So I appreciate it. I think, like I said, I think you did a really great job for, like I said, for a first draft, which I was also very surprised by when I read it, that this was a first draft, because this definitely came off to me as like at least a third or fourth draft. I was like, this has been through the ringer. It has to have. He's had to beat this story up really badly. But no, you came out swinging, and I respect that.
I remember when I mentioned that I didn't have any novels I could let you guys look at, I said I was working on a screenplay, and oh, we'd love to do a screenplay. I'm like, I'm only 3/4 of the way through. You're gonna have to wait till November.
No worries, it was definitely worth the wait.
Oh, good. I'm glad that you enjoyed it.
So the final thing that we usually like to do is we like to let our guests plug themselves, let people know where to find them, what they're working on, what's coming out for them, or what they already have out, all the good stuff. It's all about you.
Sure. Well, I have recently released a book this year. One for the money, two for the soul. It's kind of like a young adult sci-fi. It's really fun, zany, just an adventure story I actually wrote it for adults, but my young teen, she read it, she got it, she loved it. And so it really is a family friendly type of a book. And so that I am actually, you know what, for any of your listeners here, if they mention that they heard about this book on your podcast, just go to my website, go to my contacts page, say that you meant, say which podcast you found it on, and I will email you a copy of this book for free. So
Very
I
nice.
hope that helps. And then later on in March, I've got my my fantasy noir hard-boiled cabbage coming out. That's going to be a fun one. That's going to be a series book. There are like 6 books in that series, but I'll be releasing one of those each year. So those are what I have now and upcoming. So I'm not going to give you my hard-boiled cabbage one for free, but I will give you my my other one here for free. And really, it is a good book. I'm not just giving it away because it's dumb. I'm giving it away because nobody knows who I am yet. And I want you guys to share this with as many people as you can and just spread the word. Hey, Brent Lindstrom, he's there. He's good.
Love it. We'll definitely link your website down below and make sure that anyone who listens to this does know to get good stories from you.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Of course.
Thank you for being here.
It's been a pleasure. I've enjoyed getting to know you guys both on and off the air. So it's been great.
Fantastic. We enjoy you as well, Brent. Welcome to the Ovaverse. We appreciate
I
it.
do look forward to having you guys do some actual edits because you do that. So
Yes.
Yeah.
We're looking forward to having you do so.
and this time I'll pay you.
I always want to give people a a preview of what our editing style is, because we do
Give 'em a
try to
stamp.
do editing a little bit different than most other editors do. We want to avoid some of the horror stories that people have with editors. So that's why we have more than one editor look at these things, and we kind of give that dual perspective. And we want to make sure that we're connecting with the writer and letting them know that their original vision and their authentic voice does matter and should stay in the story all the way through the editing process. So I I appreciate an opportunity on this show to be able to connect with writers who catch that vision as well and can get a taste of our editing style. So hopefully when we do jump into the full on editing process, it's not as scary of like I'm giving a stranger my raw beating heart and asking them to rip it apart.
And there's only so much that AI can do to help us edit. I can speak to this. I've hired multiple editors for all of my books, and having real eyes on it with real experience like what you guys do is definitely a value that you can do some things with editing on AI, but it's not going to be what you guys can provide. And so your service is still needed in creating good novels.
Thank you for so.
I very much appreciate that. Okay. Well, again, thank you for being a guest. As far as the listeners go, thank you for listening. I'm always, again, I say this every time I meet somebody new or somebody new that's we connect with, I'm always surprised when someone's like, I listened to your show. I heard you're in a show. So I'm always surprised that somebody did. We had this running joke at the beginning of like all three people listening to the show. And now it's like, oh no, there are actually people that check it out. So for those that have listened, we appreciate it. For future listeners who will one day hear this later on and be like, "Oh, this is an old episode," but I'm glad that we appreciate you. And if you need any help with your writing, we are always available, always looking to tear things apart and put them back together in the best possible way so that your message truly comes through. So as always, Ed, you're always just one brilliant arc away from a fantastic story. I just came up with that. That was good. I like that. We're
That
gonna
was
say
really good. We went off the ship there for a moment and it paid off.
See, sometimes it works. Just stick with me. Sometimes I got to figure it out. But just write that down because we're gonna have to use that some. But anyway, anyway, thank you for listening, and we will see you the next time.